Now, to the end of August, more than 413,000 overseas migrants arrived in Australia. So any suggestion that only 500,000 new arrivals will turn up this year, well, that's fanciful. It will be much, much greater than that. So far, the workforce has clearly accommodated these people. But the housing market, well, it's showing some signs of stress as rents rise and home prices increase despite 12 interest rate rises. Cameron Kusher is the Executive Director of Economic Research at REA Group and joins me now. Cameron, always good to chat to you. There's the interesting thing. 500,000 already. It could end up being close to 600,000. You got the same number expected to come in next year. At some point, there's real issues in terms of the housing and accommodation for these people.
There certainly is, Ross, and I think we're already at that point. Most of the people that come into the country don't own a home. Most of the people that migrate to Australia are temporarily here. Students, in fact, that are here for up to 5 years while they study. So if you're only here on a temporary visa, you're probably not going to look to buy a home, but you are going to spend a number of years in the rental market. And this is really exacerbating the challenges we're seeing in the rental market at the moment. We've had that household size shrink through the pandemic. We've had now more people coming into the country wanting to rent and wanting to rent for a longer period of time. We've also had more people that own investment properties exiting the market, so it's shrinking the overall pool of rental stock. And to cap that all off, we're seeing a low volume of new dwelling approvals and commencements. So we're not getting the supply response we really need. So it's exacerbating the challenges in the rental market. And longer term, it's going to exacerbate the challenges in the established market too, because at some point, some of these people that have come in from overseas are going to want to stay and they're going to want to buy their own property. And there's not going to be anywhere near enough stock available for them to purchase.
So that causes another dilemma for the government, which obviously has this plan for 1.2 million homes over the next 5 years. But on top of it, it also creates a problem for the Reserve Bank because while you've got home prices rising, it's very, very hard at that point to really start to cut interest rates anytime soon.
That's right. I mean, I'm expecting, given the inflation number we saw last week, that we will see a increase in interest rates when the RBA board meets in November. Inflation's certainly coming down, but not at the pace that they were anticipating. And I think most other people have moved to that same view. But in terms of the prospects of interest rate cuts, well, yeah, I think they're getting pushed out even further and further now because all these people we're adding into the economy is adding to demand. I think most people were anticipating that property prices would fall this year. We certainly were, and they're continuing to grind higher. And the cost of renting is continuing to increase as well because we're not building anywhere near enough housing. And yes, it's great that we've got this goal to build 1.2 million homes over the coming 5 financial years, but the prospect of doing that, I think, is it looks very unlikely to me.
OK, then there's another truism of property and property markets, and that is where the population goes, the prices will move up the fastest. So where are these people going to? Because there's not just the new migration coming in from outside of Australia, it's also the interstate migration, which becomes really instructive in terms of the future of property prices in individual markets.
It certainly does. So most of the people that arrive in Australia arrive in New South Wales and Victoria, and you can imagine most of that is in Sydney or Melbourne. But, you look at the other states and territories. So the most recent quarterly demographic data, Queensland saw its highest rate of net overseas migration on record, as did South Australia, and WA's right up there close to a record high as well. So you've got a record high number of people arriving from overseas. If we look at interstate migration, Queensland and WA are the big benefactors of that. So as more and more people come into Sydney and Melbourne, people that are already there move out to other areas. And Queensland, largely southeast Queensland, and WA, largely Perth, is where those people push to. But you also get the people that stay in the same state, but they move out of Sydney, maybe move to Wollongong, move up to Newcastle or somewhere else, and even people in Melbourne that get squeezed out of that market and maybe move to Ballarat or Geelong or places like that. So there's all of these fundamentals that are taking place. I do think as we start to get more up-to-date data on migration trends, we'll start to see positive net interstate migration into Victoria again. It's very close to being positive on the latest data. And I think that comes down to housing affordability. Yes, Melbourne's expensive compared to other capital cities in the country, but it is significantly cheaper than Sydney. And I think when people have the choice of whether to move to Sydney or Melbourne, I think people will preference Melbourne because they'll feel like, A, rents are a lot cheaper. You're looking at a median rent in Melbourne of $500 a week as opposed to $650 a week in Sydney. But also, if you're going to stay there and buy a property, buying a property in Melbourne is much cheaper than it is buying a property in Sydney.
So, Cam, there's one other thing that strikes me about this, and that is, while a lot of people might be going to southeast Queensland or maybe to parts of Victoria, it's also the infrastructure, which is government responsibility, that has to be built to keep up with this population.
That's a real challenge too. Like, as you say, when you're adding all these people to the country and to parts of the country, you need to build the infrastructure and the housing to support them. And the challenge we've got, particularly in a lot of the major capital cities at the moment, is there's so much infrastructure construction going on that it's actually taking away the people that need to build the houses that we need to build to cater to this growing population.
Cam Kusher, always great to have you on the program. Many thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Ross.